Ao passar pelo ribeiro, onde às vezes me debruço.
Invite this very special guest for this discussion. The reason was because we really wanted to have new voices or different kind of voices that could help us to reflect on the topic of today's conversation. So today we will talk about cultural rights, public space, democracy, well-being, and security. So this is a long list of keywords, probably very popular keywords today, but the connection between them is not as easy. So that's why I propose them to have an open conversation, a dialogue, using local examples, but at the same time, doing a reflection, a conceptual approach to these key topics. And I want just now to introduce our guest, because probably that will help you to understand why we are proposing them to join us in this wonderful Festival of Arts of Castilla and Leon. So I will start with Jen. Janice Noble, she is a professor of economics at Rhodes University in South Africa, and she's also the chief research strategist of the South Africa Cultural Observatory. And probably this is the main reason to invite her, because in this observatory, they are following the cultural field of South Africa. They're collecting data, they do surveys, they try to understand, they are in very permanent contact with the professionals, the arts and heritage organization in the whole country. And I think what is happening in South Africa is very interesting, because it's a very alive country, it's a very dynamic country with a lot of problems, but at the same time, with these problems, we have to transform in challenges. And I think this is the kind of country that we can learn many, many things. Just to give you a small information, there are more than 10 official languages. So just to deal with a long list of official languages, that means from a cultural point of view, is a big challenge, but that means that to deal with cultural diversity, with a difficult past, of course, we all of us know the difficult past of South Africa, but as well the transition process, which was quite successful. So thanks, Jen, to join us in this conversation.
Thank you for having
Our second guest is Bojan. Bojan Milosavljević. It's always difficult to pronounce correctly Serbian's name. He's a professional theater director. He's a person with a long background of academic background, because he studied political science, new public management. He also follows a very interesting alternative program from the Center for Women Studies in Belgrade and in Contemporary Performing Arts in Amsterdam. So that gives us the background. He's currently now working as a program developer in the Foundation Novi Sad to 2020, European Capital of Culture. As you probably know, Novi Sad in Serbia is one of the 2021 European Capital of Culture. But the pandemic arrived, and they have to reinvent, to think what to do when you have a problem, which is all the program that you were preparing during years and years, you have to change it. So it is a delay. He will explain a little bit how they change things, what is the agreement with the European Commission, because this doesn't only affects them, but affects as well the other European capital. So, and at the same time, Bojan is also working in many European projects, has a strong experience in different Creative Europe, but also Erasmus Plus and other kind of European Union projects. So that gives him a very interesting approach. So thank you very much to join us for this conversation today. So the topic, well, it is as well a challenging topic. I said it before, many connected keywords. And I will try to structure this conversation in 3 blocks. Maybe that will help us to organize our discussion in three blocks. I will start with a question mark. Culture as an antidote to the crisis. How the pandemic is affecting the cultural life in your countries, both in creativity, production, participation, and so on. So I want a little bit in this first block to talk on sustainability and the resilience of culture and the connection between these 2 words, which is not always a direct connection, because we can say, oh, we are resilient, that's why we are sustainable, but probably this is not the right answer. So I want to use some of the time on this. Later, this is just a small information for our for the people in the hall and the people who are following us through streaming. The second question will be more on the topic of the role of culture and the recognition of the role of culture. And the third question will be more, the third block of this dialogue will be more on cultural policies. So how this affects cultural policies, how we can react from cultural policies. So we will start with the first topic, and I will ask Jen to start. You will see that we will just exchange our points of view. So Jen, I will try to focus again the question. Now the question is, culture is an antidote to the crisis, how the pandemic is affecting the cultural life in your country, and probably from this first data we can probably discuss about these 2 key concepts. Sustainability, by the way, Jen is as well, he's working not only in cultural economics, but she's working as well on sustainability issues, natural heritage, and this kind of issues. So I think the concept of sustainability is a concept she knows very well, but the connection between sustainability and resilience of culture. Jen, please.
Thank you. Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation, which I really appreciate and enjoy. In terms of culture as an antidote to the crisis, we had an interesting contradiction in South Africa, which was that during the lockdown, which is still going on, our lockdown started at the end of March. It continues until now, so we are nearly at 200 days of lockdown. But a lot of cultural content was consumed online, broadcast, and so on. So we had much more access of culture. But on the other hand, the producers of culture were really suffering financially because no live culture was allowed at all. So we went through a stage where no visiting, no moving outside of the home, and that is still going on now to some extent. So we had this kind of disconnect between access and culture and the importance of culture on the demand side, if you like, and then this kind of collapse of what was happening on the supply side. And that was especially the case for cultural producers who were not permanent full-time employees. They maybe work on contract or they work with no contract informally, and government support for that sector, it wasn't really there unless you could show that you had actually had a contract cancelled, for example, which many people in the creative sector couldn't because they don't work on long-term kind of contracts or any kind of contract at all. But we did see some interesting resilience coming through. And I want to just make a concrete example here of the South African National Arts Festival. So this is the biggest festival in Africa, many people claim. It takes place in June, July every year in quite a small university town in one of the poorer provinces of South Africa. It lasts for about 10 days, and last year there were 620 different productions that were produced at this festival, some of them on the main program, very heavily subsidized, and some open access kind of fringe. And the festival was a really important space for a whole lot of reasons. And one of them was obviously the access to culture that it provided. So there were lots of free shows and things that were available to people who wouldn't normally be able to access that kind of thing. So that's especially local populations, but also the artists and the producers themselves. It was a space for networking. It was a space for meeting other people, putting together teams for what's coming before, for being spotted by talent spotters who want to take your show somewhere else. And also it had a big touristic impact or economic impact on the place where it happened. So it attracts maybe 10,000 visitors at least who stay for 4 or 5 days each. So it was really important from a whole lot of different directions. And when the lockdown started and it became clear it's not going to happen this year, the festival organizers very quickly shifted online. So in less than 100 days, they took this massive face-to-face festival that usually has the huge auditorium with 1,000 people packed together, lots of smaller auditoriums where everybody is together in a small space, not allowed at all now, right? And they moved the whole thing online as much as they could. And this had a lot of different impacts. And one of the impacts was that it actually increased accessibility to people who did not have to travel to the festival now. So if you had data and you had a device, you could log on. There was free content still available, but you had to buy tickets. So it also provided income for the artists. But there were also things that did not work, right, or that were lost. Obviously, no economic or touristic impact for the town that normally relies on this. No access for people who do not have access to the data or who don't have a computer or a smartphone. And in South Africa, data is really expensive. So one of the things that's cheaper for me when I travel to Europe is data. It actually costs less where you are than in South Africa, and so that's not a small cost. And then some of the producers also said things changed, right? Not having the live audience, not being able to do the informal networking, that was lost. It wasn't there. So in some ways, yes, resilience happened. It was an opportunity to do something online. Maybe it's opened up new online platforms, but also things that were left behind. And one of the things that happened was that the so-called digital divide, right? The difference between people who have access and are comfortable online producing or consuming and people who are not became much deeper. And I think that also speaks to the issue of cultural rights and sustainability. So I'm going to end by saying that because of that digital divide, I think there are major questions around the sustainability and the impact of purely online events that we need to just keep in mind going forward.
One question I would like to ask you, but probably we'll discuss this in the third block, is local government and local stakeholders, which probably were interested in this festival for this economic and touristic impact, in which way the capacity of resilience of the festival were important for them, because the name of the place were still very clear in the title, but there were not all these kind of intrinsic value impacts, all these kind of externalities of this festival. That works in favor or against the intrinsic value of culture, and in which way that has an effect on cultural policies, local cultural policies. So I want to have this question just in mind, because will affect what we'll discuss in the third part of this conversation. But in any case, if you have a very short answer to this, you can do that now. But if not, we will save the question for later.
I think let's save it for later. It's not really a short answer that one can give, but a very it's a very interesting question and brings into play all kinds of things relating to power relations between local and national government and cultural policies and so on. So I think let's maybe if you don't mind, we can leave that one for the cultural policies discussion.
Bojan, how do you answer to this key question?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and it's a great opportunity to participate in these online sessions. And to start with this example about European Capital of Culture, Novi Sad 2021, this pandemic crisis affecting these projects, not only in Novi Sad and Serbia, but also in other cities in Romania, for example, and Greece. Because in 2021, it was planned three cities to be European Capital of Culture: Novi Sad in Serbia, Timisoara in Romania, and Elefsina in Greece. And because of this pandemic situation, all three these capitals are postponed: Novi Sad for 2022, and Timisoara and Elefsina for 2023. And this is the real impact on our planning and our lives and our thinking about culture, and we try to find new forms and new topics. But I think that the situation is almost the same in culture. In this cultural field, the situation is almost the same in all parts of this our global village. And we struggle the same problems and challenges, but some art disciplines and cultural fields are more affected than others by this pandemic crisis. This is the fact. For example, theater and dance at one side are really suffering because theaters was closed almost more than 6 months. In September, they are starting in Serbia to work, but in other European countries, I think it's still a problem, and they're closed and so on. But maybe for literacy and these books and market and so on, I think that maybe they have some positive impact. I would like to see the statistic of selling the books in different cities in this period of pandemic crisis. It's increasing, or what's happening in this field? That I think we need to speak specifically about specific disciplines. But what is the most important in my approach to the culture when we speak about this in relation to this topic of this session? When we speak about culture, I think that we need to speak to question. Ordinarily, we think about culture that we know what culture is, and we assume some values. But the main question, what culture is, in not about the different disciplines, but in meaning of identities and values. And we speak about the question, culture as an antidote to the crisis. What kind of culture? Because culture is always the field of power struggle and struggles. And it's always a question, who is producing the culture and for whom and why? And this is I think we need always to speak in plural about cultures and not in singular about culture. This is something that we need to change, I think, in paradigm, in main paradigm of this speaking about culture. And always it's, in this context, it's important to think about different perspectives, about classes, about gender, about ethnics, about races, and about who is suffering from this culture, for this crisis in cultural field. Also, it's important when we speak about culture, we almost always speak about the arts, but not about social theory and humanities. And I think it's always important to think that this is also important reflection of art and thinking about ideas and values. It's also important part of culture, and maybe have much more influence and impact on culture than arts. And also, I think it's important to open discussion about what is the impact of this crisis on social theory, and what will change in social theory brings this pandemic and crisis. And when we speak about interdisciplinarity, we speak almost always between a mixture of different arts. But I think interdisciplinarity for me means more a combination between social theory, let's say sociology, philosophy, and this kind of and arts. Because yesterday was the topic interdisciplinarity, and I add this important, I think, issue. Also, we need to speak about also in specific context about commercial art and some, let's say, critical thinking art. This is the different things, and the art that is funded by public sources and art that is on a market. But not only about that, because some art is following the main hegemony cultural paradigm and promoting some values that we need to discuss. And there is some critical art who is asking the very important and humanistic question, and it's not commercial because it's not promoted well, and depending on public funds. I think that the main problem and focus is that this pandemic, I'm afraid that this pandemic will have a negative impact on this critical thinking art and this kind of not commercial art. Yes, this is for the first.
Thanks, Bojan. I think I will link what you are saying with the second group of questions, the second topic I wanted to share with you, because is there an explicit or only an implicit recognition of the key role of culture for human beings' well-being? So when you said culture is much wider, and sometimes we restrict only to the arts and the cultural heritage, I think it's totally right. Because when we talk about the role of culture for well-being, for human beings' well-being, things change, because it is, and I think the pandemic was very clear in showing how important is the cultural experience, the capacity to connect with others, to create symbolic values, to share songs, books, etc., with peers, with colleagues, with friends, through the audiovisual system, especially when you have to be at home, close, because so the idea of the way to participate, not only the way to consume culture, because I think it's important to open as well in this way, and this link as well to the cultural right of each one of us, the cultural rights of small communities in this global village where we talk all the time about cultural diversity, but we don't really live this in a comfortable way. So the question is there a recognition only of some parts of the cultural experience? Is really we are living a situation of openness? How cultural diversity? So that's a little bit the kind of, it's a group of questions. I know it's very large. We won't stop to talk on these questions because all of them are interlinked. But I want to listen. What is your experience? What do you think?
You're asking me, yeah?
Well, you can start and Jen can follow.
Okay. When we speak about the question is recognition of the key role of culture for human beings' well-being, there is really question, what is the well-being? What is the human well-being? This is not that we can assume as we know what is that. There is different concepts and ideology behind this, what is the well-being. Also, the question, very maybe, and from which perspective we are speaking about well-being. It's political also question, but art is always political, if we are aware or not about this. But the controversial question is who we define as a human being. It's also the question about the races and all this question about inhumanity and injustice in our society. And this is really the question that we understand that all the people are human beings, but in a question of rights, this is the question of who we treat as a human being in a rights in different societies. And this is really the hard question. And I think that I hope that this pandemic will have influence on, or have impact on to bring some new content and open the new questions in the real question, and rethink not only in the society but new approach to thinking about the culture. What is the role of culture in society? Is just some fun event, or we have some really change need, or art and culture need to change to bring some social change? And what kind of changes? Not just some changes, but what is the important changes of some society? I think especially it's important as a cultural policy, as a public cultural policy, to think about what is the problem of society and what we want. For example, when we speak about cultural rights, I always want to emphasize the question of youth culture and culture for kids, and also culture for the people in rural areas. I think that nobody speaks about them. Artists are representing their social bubbles and almost let's say, some middle class and some urban culture and so on. But who is representing the culture for kids and youth culture and in all this debate and ministries and politics and so on? And I think that when you analyze the public budgets for the culture and how much money go for adults and for the kids and for young people, you will see that we as adult peoples are really selfish, and we think about culture for us, and we don't have so much sense to understand the needs of the kids and for the young people and for their participation. We give them just the bones from our table, but not give them the main meals sometimes. And if you analyze the cultural institution in some cities, you will see that you have 10 cultural institutions for adults and 1 youth culture center. And if you analyze the programs in this, let's say, they say this is the for general audience, but this is sometimes the trap if we think about general audience, everything for general audience. But some programs need to be specifically created for some target groups and for some social groups, and this development of audience and accessibility, and there is a lot of question. To be also concrete about also in debates about this crisis of COVID pandemic, it's more focused on artists and suffering of artists, about economic suffer of artists, but I don't think that so much people speak about audience and problem of audience. What is what audience? What social groups as an audience lost some connections and accessibility to the culture. For example, old people who don't have the computers and don't are skilled with the new techniques and so on. There is much I think as in culture policy we need to think more about audience, because they are beneficiaries and the artists are, let's say, some instruments of this and presenting of mediums of presenting some values. They are important part, but to think on both sides, not just focus only on suffering of artists.
I think that what you said is very interesting, and I was thinking that if that happens in a country like Serbia, that we could say that is more or less homogeneous. When we move that to South Africa, which is probably the heart of diversity, with so many different ethnic groups, with so many different, with these huge social and economic differences between very rich people and very poor people, the people who digital engagement and other people who doesn't have any right to that. And you were talking about audiences, but we also have to think about other kinds of cultural rights, which is the right to express yourself, to be recognized as who you are, to be producer of your own culture, etc., etc. So I suppose in South Africa, if in Europe the challenge is huge, in South Africa is even more important. Mm-hmm. How do you say? How do you think on this, Jen? What is your opinion?
Yes, well, I mean, you're quite right. So it's not only the 12 probably 13 soon official languages, because sign language will also be recognized. But it's differences in where you live and in how you live. So we have big rural populations in some provinces, and they don't even have data coverage, right? Let alone, I mean, you can't make a cell phone call in some of these places. So access is really important. But even within cities and towns, coming out of the apartheid era, there were big differences in the development level of people who lived maybe 2 kilometers apart because of the kind of racial divide. So going back to what Bojan was saying about how do you recognize the human rights of people, or who has those rights? Of course, this was really a vital thing that happened in South Africa, was that in 1994, in the move to democracy, we see that cultural policy shifts completely to this whole issue of cultural rights, and not only in terms of official consumption, going to shows and so on, but also in more unofficial kinds of participation. So culture is recognized as important for people's identity, for their dignity, for their well-being broadly, as their right to express themselves in their language, with the culture of your ancestors being represented somehow. And so cultural policy really moves to the public good values and to focus on access, to try and spread those things. So what happens also in terms of the funding for culture is that it's moved away from big public institutions, and it's given to panels like the National Arts Council to decide with a panel of experts what is it that should be funded. And so this opens the doorway to all kinds of culture, even maybe those controversial ones that you were mentioning, right? The ones that government itself may not be too comfortable with, but the feeling was that we have to have those voices, as many different voices as possible, in order to have a kind of functioning democracy. But now what's tending to happen a little bit since the financial crisis of 2008-9 is that there's a shift towards more the instrumental values of culture. So on the one hand, there's still this sort of very big focus on culture for identity and rights and social cohesion, but then at the same time, there's this move towards the cultural and creative industries, right? And so it becomes more kind of profit-focused, and it's more about jobs and contribution to GDP. And one can sort of understand that because, government departments are also needing to explain why they are very relevant. And so they kind of shift that way. But then the focus becomes, not so much on things like rights and access, and spending becomes a little bit more focused on events or institutions that have a big impact, So we have government programs like there's one called Zanzi's Golden Economy. Zanzi being the nickname for South Africa in Zulu, it means south. So the golden economy is meant to be the cultural and creative economy, right? So perhaps South Africa used to be very big in gold mining, so that used to be our big export. Now the mining sector is just about finished. So this was marketed, if you like, as the new gold, would be the cultural wealth of the country, which we could use to drive economic growth and job creation. And for me, that leaves a little bit behind the focus on social cohesion and identity and broader access. So I think things are changing as we go along.
Well, I think South Africa probably has a wonderful constitution. I think one of the most progressive at world level on the acceptance of cultural diversity. And I think probably 10 years ago was a lighthouse for many, many other countries. But probably the situation now changed in the sense that real politics is moving things to another place, and that's a real issue, and I think it's interesting to try to see the contradiction. So we can have a very beautiful written text. We can have good objective. The goals are clear, but later the focus, as Bojan said before, sometimes the artists are in their bubble, and they are not enough connected to what is happening in complex societies like the ones that we live. But in any case, what I would try to ask you is, do you think that the cultural rights will be better protected in a context like the context that it's opening now? Not only at this very moment, but all this changing situation, all these experience that allows us to understand that the cultural experience were absolutely necessary in terms of our well-being. I think that's something that many of us discover during these pandemic times. Say, oh, it is important. It's really one of the most fundamental things we need. There are other things that are very less important. And in which way this will affect future cultural policies? It's clear that the new priorities will be to invest in health, to invest in technology. They are in the agenda. These are in the agenda. The question is culture in the agenda as well? Because all of us recognize the intrinsic value and how important it is for us as human beings, or do you feel that we will fall down to a greater instrumentalization? What do you think, Matt? Bojan?
Yes, I will start with presenting our concept of European Capital of Culture. We try to make different programs for different social groups. We have for young people, for kids, for women's culture, for some engaged culture, for some ecology, for some, let's say, popular culture, and so on. We really try to make this diversity in our concept of programming. But as we speak about this pandemic crisis, at this point, the main question is how long will this crisis last, and what will be the consequences on economy, different public policies, on politics, society? This is the question mark. What will be the midterm and long-term impacts also is the question mark. And we are still in some kind of fog and transition, in some kind of bardo, as Laurie Anderson said yesterday in this another conversation session. Situation in Serbia is like that we had elections, national elections in June, I think, yes, end of June. And now we are waiting for the new government. The same party will stay with majority in parliament, but there are some voices about changes in Ministry of Culture, and we are waiting to see what will happen and what will this new government brings in not only in the cultural field, but also in other fields connecting with culture. Because I think that we also need to think cross-sectorial, not think about culture as a specific field, but also to connect the culture with other politics, because it's always depending. What more I can say? Yes, we are facing the cut of cultural funds, and they are decreasing because of this pandemic situation, and it will affect some aspects of culture, but we are in a fog. But I think this pandemic situation, it's really the surface, and maybe sometimes politicians use to cover some main, more deep problems, and I think the roots are just much more deeper of cultural crisis than this pandemic situation, and this situation will bring them to be much more maybe visible. I would like to, I'm open to see what will happen. And for my opinion, I would like to see the changes between sector of education and culture to see the more links and reforms of methodology of using the culture in formal education.
Jen, we don't have a lot of time. We have to finish very soon, but maybe you can just give us some idea.
Well, I think there's a huge opportunity here. I want to agree that the recognition of culture as being part of our everyday lives, so not purely a consumption thing, but something we can all participate in, that it runs across everything that we do, innovation, teaching and learning, healthcare. And so if we take that opportunity to kind of take this broader view of what culture is and what it can do, then I think something really amazing could come out of the pandemic, because we've had this kind of mental shift about how important it is. On the other hand, Bojan, you're quite right. There are very restricted resources now. So that's going to be, I think, the question: which direction do we go from here?
Thanks to all of you, because we have to close now. We started a little bit late, but we have to try to be on time and to give space for the next activity. So I want to thank your contribution. I think it was really interesting, and I think we could continue talking for a long time, but we are ready. So we will come to Salamanca next time, by sure, to discuss again on these very important topics. So thank you very much, Jen and Bojan, and had a wonderful, good time at home. And I hope next you won, so that the pandemic will finish very soon, and we will be able to be together face to face very soon. Thanks.
Thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
Thank you.